Hi, guys. Welcome to another Monday night study. Lots of interesting things to talk about tonight and share with you, but let's get into our study. First off, we're talking about Russia and how it plays into the Roman Empire. And the reason we mention that is because as Christians, we're always looking for a revived Roman Empire and then a 10-nation confederacy that comes on the scene, etc. I just noticed a few correlations and I wanted to kind of brush back over that again. Nothing definitive, but I think it's an interesting study. So basically, we all understand that in Ezekiel chapter 38 and 39, we have a Gog Magog war. And some people still debate on who Magog is, but most of us understand it to be the area of ancient Magog is southern Russia. So we're talking about a Russian invasion of Israel sometime. And then some people debate if that's before or after the rapture. Is it just at the end of the millennial reign? When is that? Or there's more than one of them, etc. So I wanted to kind of mention a few things to you. Let's look at that real quick, and I want to point out just a couple of things, and then I want to show you some history and some other things that I thought was interesting in light of what's going on with Russia right now. And of course, you know what's going on with Russia is that they've invaded the Ukraine. And I'm not saying that that's a good thing or a bad thing or anything else. And it may or may not have a direct implication in prophecy, but I think it has something to do with it. At the very least, the rising of Russia. And of course, we look at that and say, well, Russia is extremely huge as far as an area base, a people base. Um, and they've been a world power, a superpower for a long time. United States, Russia, and China are the three superpowers. But still, there's more to it than just that. And I think we'll see that in text. So if we go to, here is Ezekiel 38. We'll just read some of the first parts. So this is a prophecy that the Lord gave Ezekiel against Gog, who's the chief prince of Magog and other places. So it says here, the word of the Lord came to me, saying, Son of man, set your face against Gog, the land of Magog, the chief prince of Meshach Tubal, and prophesy against him. Now, Gog, people have always speculated what that means. Gog actually in Hebrew means roof, so it's like the topmost part of something. So if you're talking about Magog being southern Russia, Gog is definitely northern Russia or the top of the world. I mean, theoretically, you could say it's the North Pole, but there's no nation that lives up that far. So the farthest north would be that. In the Septuagint and a few old places, Gog is also a fallen angel. And so you could actually say Gog is the prince of Magog, or he's being led by a demonic spirit, something like that. So we're not exactly sure about Gog, but Magog we know for sure. Magog and the Magogites settled in what we call southern Russia, the Scythian or Scythian Empire, as it was called back then. So he's the chief prince of, and then here's two other places, Meshach and Tubal. It has been thought that these might be the old names for Moscow and Tobolsk, which are the capital of White Russia and Siberia. But they're also kids, great grandsons of Noah. Whether these names are directly related or not, we don't know. And a lot of people confuse this. And where it says chief prince, the Hebrew for that is Rosh. And people say, well, Rosh is Russia. Well, it actually just means chief or ruler of. But no matter how you do with chief prince, Rosh, Meshach, Tubal, and Gog, we know it's a Magog invasion. So Magog is the key for this. So we know it's a Russian invasion of Israel. And there's lots of other studies. I could pull out a lot of history and word studies for verse 2 and take up most of the hour, but we won't do that. So this is a prophecy against Magog or Russia. Okay. And it says, Say, thus says the Lord, behold, I am against thee, O Gog, chief prince of Meshach and Tubal. I will turn thee back, put hooks into your jaws, and bring you forth, and all thine army with horses and horsemen, all of them clothed with all sorts of armor, a great company with bucklers and shields, all of them handling swords. Now, people have looked at this and said, well, that has to do apparently with a long time ago, because the Russian army doesn't use swords, doesn't use that kind of stuff. Well, there is a cavalry. There are people that have horses and things like that. And the one thing you have to remember is if there is some sort of a problem with energy, a nuclear or chemical attack, and people have to forget the computer-aided guided missiles and all that stuff, we would be going back to things that definitely would work. So that would be horses and swords. And against something like that, bows and arrows, shields. So, and these can mean other things also. But the point here is that the Lord is going to turn them back, put hooks into the jaws, and drive them forth. And this is what we talk about a lot. What is the hook in the jaw? And the concept is like when you're fishing, you put a bait out with a hook and the fish bites it, and then you reel it in. You are pulled into a situation. So it looks like Russia's not necessarily wanting to attack or anything, but somehow is pulled into a war. This could happen when Iran and Israel have something, going on, and Iran has a mutual defense pact with Russia, ask it to step in and defend it, or something like that. Could be a lot of scenarios like that. And they're talking about it being gas or oil that brings them down. So that could be in the near future. It could be a ways away. But what's interesting is right now, when we look at these things, we see the gas line, not oil, but the natural gas line being sabotaged by someone. It's obviously not an accident, but that prevents Russia from being able to sell or skyrocket the profits, or give it away or whatever. And that definitely goes back to Israel and some of the Arab nations as far as supplying gas, at least to Europe. Europe is kind of further up north, and so no gas, just wood heat. If they're not used to it, that could be really dangerous in the wintertime. Russian temperatures get really, really cold. So anyway, so something could be going on now. So I don't know how right now they would attack Israel and achieve anything for their people at the moment, and they're in the midst of another war too. But all this stuff kind of looks like it could play a part in this. But something happens, and there's a pull down. Now the book of Gad mentions something pulling Russia down to attack Israel. And it's got a couple of interesting clues to it. But in here, we just have something, and they come in, and obviously they're dressed for battle. Okay. Now, this is what I want to look at here, verses 5 and 6. So Magog, with Magog peoples and groups and stuff, so Russia is attacking. And then it says Persia, Ethiopia, and Libya with them, all of them with shield and helmet. So they're joining the war, not against Russia, but with Russia. So Libya is the same as Libya, we know today. Persia is Iran, okay? And then Ethiopia is Ethiopia. Well, actually, it's was Ethiopia. Ethiopia was split in two, and it became Sudan and Ethiopia. Recently, Sudan is split in two and become northern and southern Sudan. So somewhere along those lines. Now, Persia, which is Iran at the moment, and northern Sudan and Libya are all extremely fundamental Muslim terrorist organizations, not necessarily in those governments, but in those areas. There's a lot of civil war stuff going on. So we want to look at these. Now, there's another prophecy, and just to touch on it to try to pull this together, in Jeremiah 49 about Elam. Elam is the coast of Iran. It gets obliterated with some sort of fire. And there's no place that the refugees of Elam, Persia, don't go. They return home later, and Iran becomes a godly nation. That it sounds like it would become Christian, but right now that seems very far-fetched. But a lot of interesting things going on in Iran right now. The protests are getting more and more serious. Possibly factions in the government are siding with the people, so it kind of all depends. Remember back in World War II, we had, and I forget the name of it, but everything was going, I guess, fairly well, but things were beginning to change. And someone decided if Hitler was assassinated, then someone else could take over, change the course of the war, and get out before they were destroyed. And there was a bomb that went off, was supposed to kill Hitler, but it was under a table. The table was extremely thick, and it didn't hurt Hitler at all. So that's always been something that's always in the back of people's minds when something happens. When Putin, president of Russia, something had happened to him, he had to go into the hospital for a while. Maybe that's a routine thing, who knows? But my first thought is someone getting rid of Putin so someone else can take over and say, okay, now things are changing. Try to negotiate and back away from a war that's going really bad. That wasn't the case with that, but things like that happen, so we have to watch for them. But now look at this, verse 6. Gomer and all his bands, the house of Togarmah of the north quarters, and all of his bands, and many people with thee. So people debate on Togarmah, the house of the north. There's actually two halves of Togarmah, which seems to be like Armenia, in that area, Armenia, Georgia, and then Turkey. So one of those two or both, since it does say all of his bands. Gomer is one of the sons of Japheth, and one of the sons of Gomer is Ashkenaz. And we know about Ashkenazic Jews, which are German Jews. So most people believe that Gomer represents Germany. I'm one of those people. And then other, the borders expand and shrink all the time, so it can include other people. But this is Gomer, which I would consider Germany, and all of his bands. So all of those things. When I was back in seminary, my professor said that he knew that this meant Germany as a whole would come back together. And he hesitated on saying that eventually East and West Germany would come back together, because everybody was saying, no, that's never going to happen. I remember in high school, I actually asked my American history teacher, because we had got up to World War II or something. And I said, well, since Germany has started World War I and World War II, what is the chance of them coming back together and starting World War III? And I remember the teacher said, never happen. We separated it. It's two separate things. It can't. It just cannot ever happen. And I'm thinking, yeah, that's not what the scripture says. But what was interesting is my professor in college mentioning this. He said, I wish I would have went ahead and told everybody East and West coming together. And he says, I'm not going to make that mistake again. So you guys need to know it's East and West Germany and Austria that all come together to form a united Germany. And so that will happen sometime in the future. And again, I'm not predicting that. That's what my professor said, but based on the way it used to be. And I'm thinking there might be some truth to that, not just because he's my professor, but some other stuff that I found. But so look at this then. If Gomer is Germany, we all know that there was the Holy Roman Empire. And that basically started with France and Spain and wound up in Germany for the longest time. And then it was eventually obliterated. So when you talk about Germany as a whole, you can be talking about the western side of the Roman Empire, or Western Roman Empire. The eastern side is the Byzantine Empire. And we remember in Daniel chapter 2, we have Nebuchadnezzar's image, of which we have the two legs, and that's East and West Rome. So this goes on and talks about other stuff, and it happens in the latter days. So let's stop there for this, and I want to show you a couple of things. And so let me first back up and look at I thought I had, okay. Let me just go back and see what I've got here, because I'm sure I have. There we go. That's the one I'm looking for. Metal images of Daniel. So this is Daniel chapter 2. And we remember that there's a Babylonian head of gold, chest and arms of silver, which is Medo-Persia, the Grecian Empire, which ends up being Syria and Egypt at the time, and then they get taken over by Rome. So there's a united Rome somewhere in here, but then Rome splits in 395, and we have Eastern and Western Rome, and that's what this is showing. So the Messiah is coming like right in here sometime. And 64 BC is when the Romans came in, took over Israel. And in 395 is the division of the Roman Empire, and you have the East and the West. And so this is interesting, and I want us to just focus on this for a minute. So according to the prophecy, then, this is Rome, and eventually there is another kingdom that comes out of it, which is feet and toes of clay and iron. And the idea is that there's these 10 toes down here, as long as you can see this okay, and they are 10 confederated nations out of what was the Roman Empire. And what I always tell people, and I was always told growing up, the Roman Empire fell in 476. Western Rome did. And then Eastern Rome, which is the Byzantine Empire, the Holy Roman Empire, Byzantine Empire, Christian Empire, fell in 1453, 1,000 years later. But I start looking at this and look at this image now and think about it. Nebuchadnezzar and his son and then grandson are ruling the Babylonian Empire. It doesn't stop. There's no gap in time before the Persians take over. The Persians come and take over Babylon. Well, they rule fine until Alexander and the Greeks come, and the Greeks take over Persia. So there's no gaps between here and here. These guys are ruling until Rome comes in and takes over. And that's when the Rome starts. So if there's no gaps in here, there shouldn't be any gap between the fall of the Roman Empire and the feet of the two empires down here that are made up of 5 each. So the 10 toes. And so I always looked at that. That got me thinking originally that 476 to this is 2022. That's a long gap. Okay, well, 1453 to now is a much better, shorter gap, but there really shouldn't be gaps. So in some sense, this is continuing. So I want to look at this and kind of see how it goes. And down here, you'll notice I've got 1917 or 1945 as the possible end of the empires, and I'll show you why. And I say possible because it's possible it's not over yet, or we would have 10 nations here. So very interesting in this. So let's go back to, see, where did I want this? I think this is it. Okay. So here is an old, well, the history basically of the Roman Empire. And I want you to think of several things. So remember, originally Rome was pagan, right? They worshiped Zeus, Hera, Hercules, all these guys. It wasn't until hundreds of years later that Constantine came along. And then after him, they became Christian. I mean, it was tolerated and then eventually became a Christian nation. And then it split into two separate Christian nations. Now, granted, it's not Christian like we would think, but they're claiming to be Christian, just like they were claiming to be pagan. And so my point is not saying that they're really Christian or they're not, but they were pagan. Then they became Christian, but it's still Rome, right? So if the Roman Empire changes religion, it doesn't really mean anything, okay, if the empire continues. So if one of the Roman emperors went back to paganism or became a Muslim or became a Hindu or something like that, and the whole empire changed to that religion, it really wouldn't mean anything other than the empire changed religions. So that's one thing we need to think about at first. So here's the pagan Roman Empire, Greco-Roman gods. So, and then in 64 BC, let me see if I can bump this up just a little bit bigger without going off the page. Here we go. Okay, so anyway, 64 BC conquers Israel. And then in 380, Rome becomes Christian. So you got the Council of Nicaea, the tolerations, everything with Constantine. And then later on, great-grandson or somebody becomes Christian, makes the empire Christian. It's not just tolerated, it's the official religion, you know. And so later on, they start getting rid of the pagan temples and that kind of stuff. So that's in 380. Just 15 years later, the empire splits in two. Okay, so two separate empires, east and west. And so that's the two legs that we see. So this continues. Now in 476, Rome falls. Okay. And then as far as the empire is concerned, it just stops. So, but you have Roman Catholicism, which is back in here somewhere, continuing to have a type of governmental authority, but like no army by itself, for instance. So it's just the Vatican, basically. So it's kind of pseudo ruling without an army. It's not actually an empire by itself, ruling from 476 to 800. Now in 800, the Pope recognized and ordained, so to speak, Charlemagne, the first Holy Roman Emperor. Now you've got a guy who, you know, like I say, it goes from France to Spain, to Germany over the time. But this empire shifts. So just because it's in France for a while, then it's in Spain for a while, then it's in Germany for a while, doesn't really make any difference. When the headquarters goes from one place to another in the empire, it's still the empire. So we're looking, just try to remember that for a second. So the Holy Roman Empire officially goes from 800 to 1806, 1,000 years this empire ruled, which is amazing. Destroyed by Napoleon Bonaparte. Okay. Now we'll stop there for a minute and back up, because again, at 476, Rome fell. But in 395 is when they split. Well, the other side of Rome is where the actual Caesars went. So this is Byzantium. It starts the Byzantine Empire. So in the West, you've got Roman Catholics with a pope ruling from Rome, and everything is in Latin. In the East, you've got the Caesars ruling from Byzantium. Constantinople is what it's called today, or vice versa. Anyway, Constantinople. Istanbul is what it's called today. And everything is in Greek. So two separate empires, but basically the same concept. So slightly different religions, different major languages. All the official documents are in Latin in the West, Greek in the East. So anyway, this goes down to, and 600 Islam begins. And Islam, you know, comes and goes and gets powerful and not and back and forth. But finally, in 1056, the Roman Catholic and Eastern Orthodox churches split over many things, but the main thing that did the split was the iconoclastic controversy. So it's the idea of you're not supposed to worship an idol or pray to an idol. And so the Roman Catholics said, if I have a statue of a saint, it's not really an idol because it's a saint. And the Eastern Church said a statue is a statue. It is an idol. And so what they said is we will have two-dimensional pictures. So we just have pictures of saints. Now they both pray to the saints, ask the saints to pray for them, etc. So there's a very little difference, at least today. But to me, it's interesting. It's not really an idol if it's two-dimensional instead of three-dimensional. But that was kind of the whole thing. Actually, I think it was more along the lines, the real issue was the Pope was saying, I have the right to rule all of Christianity. And the Eastern Orthodox was saying, that's not the way it's ever been. You're just a Pope of a patriarchate, like Pope Stephen was of Carthage and all the other patriarchates. So all sorts of different popes. So anyway, so the church split at this point, but the empire continued. Okay, so the empire at this isn't just, a Christian empire. It's a anti-Roman Catholic Eastern Orthodox empire. And Western Rome has fallen, but the Pope is still over there. So this continues from 1056 to 1453 with the fall of Byzantium. And that's when the Ottoman Empire begins. So in other words, the person that took it over is a Muslim. And from here going down, it's a Muslim empire. And people say, well, okay, so the Christian empire ended in 1453. Yeah, but do we want to look at that as a religion or is it an empire? See, all the way through this 1,000 years, I would rule my son, my grandson, my great grandson. It's our lineage, and then somebody would come and wipe us out, and it would be a new what we call dynasty. So their family now rules, father, son, grandson, however long they rule, and then somebody else comes along, wipes them out, a new dynasty. So in this case, the Christians were wiped out and the new empire begins, and it happens to be Muslim rather than Roman Catholic or Christian or whatever. And there's some records that talk about the Pope actually sending word saying that he would recognize him as the new Holy Roman Emperor. And the guy basically said, I am the successor to the empire. It is the empire, but I don't need the Pope's blessing. I'm not Roman Catholic. I'm not Eastern Orthodox. I'm Muslim. We don't believe in that. So what I'm submitting to you at this point is the empire could have ceased. It depends on how you look at it, or it could have continued. The religion definitely changed. So at this point, 1453, the Ottoman Empire continues. And most of us that know a little bit of history remember a little bit of our high school anyway. In 1907, we had World War I. And World War I was to destroy an Axis power. So the Ottoman Empire was ruling for part of it, but it wasn't anywhere near as powerful as the empire. But at this point, Germany wanted to connect with the Ottoman Empire and form a new Holy Roman Empire. Because remember back here, the Holy Roman Empire was in Germany, and it ended in 1806. So not quite 100 years later, they're like, hey, let's get together, let's do something, reconstitute the empire. And the United States and the Western allies decided that would be a really bad idea, especially for that. So there was what was called a Second Reich, and that was from 1807 to 1907. They were trying, a Reich means empire. So the First Reich would theoretically be the Holy Roman Empire. The second was from 1817 to 1917. And again, with World War II, they're wiped out. But now here's an interesting twist. Now we know that the Ezra Apocalypse has a three-headed eagle prophecy. So we know Daniel too has a two-legged prophecy. So Rome is Rome. Rome splits into two pieces. According to the Ezra Apocalypse, somewhere along the line we have three. So how does the three form, and why does Daniel only have two? And it's because it forms into three and then goes back to two. So let me show you what happens. So with the fall of Byzantium, and this is controversial, I guess, because for some reason, it's amazing to me how we can believe what's being told us for hundreds of years, and then new historians come along and say, oh, that never happened. There wasn't a George Washington. It's a myth. Why is there in America if there was no George Washington? You know, stuff like that. It's anyway, they do that all the time. But basically, you go to Russia and there are kings of Russia, but about 100 years later, like in the mid 1500s, starting with Ivan the Terrible, they started using the term czar. And the teaching basically is that the daughters of the last Caesar, they were all wiped out, but the daughters came and intermarried in the Russian line. And so the Tsarist Russia would be the Caesar Russia, or the continuation of the empire. Now, again, even if that's not true, it's a great story to tell to get people to obey you. You know, we're still the Roman Empire. So, you know, It's debatable, I suppose. No clear records. But we have Tsarist Russia going down. So incidentally, um, in the actual Roman Empire, the rulers were called Caesars. In Russia, after this, after the fall and the beginning of the Ottoman Empire, the rulers were called czars, which is based on Caesar. And over here in Germany, all the way through this, the rulers were called Kaiser, which is a German form of Caesar. So they all claim to be the Roman Empire or pieces to it. So at this point, if you believe that story, we would have a Holy Roman Empire from Germany, a Ottoman Empire in the middle, or actually even back here, Byzantine Empire, if this is a continuation, and then a Tsarist Russia. So we have three basic heads to the prophecies. So what happens then? So we get to 1917, and World War I occurs. And so World War I is basically to stop the reunification of the Roman Empire. So Germany is stripped of its power. It ends. The Kaisers end. It's made to be democratic. The Ottoman Empire is destroyed. All the things are split up, etc. And the Tsarist Russia lineage ends. And remember the stuff about Rasputin and Nicholas and the missing girl Anastasia and all that stuff. But basically in 1917, it all stops. The three heads stop. Now, what happens later then is we go from 1917 to 1938. And then in Germany, a man rises to power by the name of Adolf Hitler. And to make a long story short, Hitler decides that he wants to talk with what used to be the Ottoman Empire, try to reconstitute it under German control, of course, and reconstitute the empire. And this would be the Third Reich if it worked. And do you remember Hitler said, I will create an empire and it will last for 1,000 years, just like this first one did. So that was the idea behind it. So the whole idea of Germany going together with what used to be the Ottoman Empire and creating an empire was again something that scared everybody. So again, the West stepped in and we had World War II. So the world wars have always been about stopping the reconstitution of the Roman Empire. So let me ask you this at this point then, just going back at looking at all this. If Rome was pagan, then Rome became Christian, or just say Roman Catholic, and then it split off and became Roman Catholic and Eastern Orthodox. The empire is still the empire no matter what happens with a religion. So then it comes down to here and it officially dies out in Europe, but then comes back for 100 years and dies out for approximately 20 years, and then tries to be reconstituted again, of which it dies out again. At this point, can't we say that the Roman Empire, one piece of it at least, went all the way to 1945? And it's now over, looks like it's over, 1945. Okay, so with that, and we have this ending in 1917 and Tsarist Russia ending in 1917. So from 1917 to I think, oh, it's right here, 1991, we have communists ruling in Russia. And so from 1991 forward to the present, we have a Russian Federation. And now there's talk about fixing things. And I bring this up because Putin is saying things like he is for traditional values, Russian Orthodox, which is just a slightly different form of Eastern Orthodox, so non-Roman Catholic necessarily, non-globalist. Russia is his number one priority, whereas like Trump would say, United States is my number one priority. And a globalist would say, well, let's just, make everything work. We're one big happy family, a new world order, and the scriptures talk about a time when there is a one world order and it's run by the Antichrist. That time is not here yet. But the point is, if the scriptures say there's going to be an Antichrist rise to power and this is what's going to happen, as Christians, we need to resist those things. He's going to make us take a mark on our hands, right? So any kind of technology where it's a tattoo, an implant, DNA, whatever, something under the skin, something with a right hand, it's not time yet. But anything going that direction is something Christians would say no to. And when the majority of us say no, it's going to be no. I mean, a company can't lose half of its employees, and so it's that kind of a thing. When we get to the place where not too many people care, then it becomes a different story. So this whole concept of Russia coming up, and we see the Gog and Magog invasion with Gomer. So if there is a reconstituted German side or European side, and this kind of fizzled out and became Russia, we can see why it became 3 heads, fizzled out, and now we're back to 2, which would make sense why Daniel just saw the 2 legs. He didn't see the middle part of it splitting into 3, then going back to 2. So just looking at this. So with Russia coming down and eventually attacking Israel with Gomer and a lot of other people on its side, that could be a reconstituted Roman Empire. Now, if Russia and Germany and stuff are destroyed, as Ezekiel 38 says, then they're out of the picture. That creates a vacuum of power in which 10 nations rise up and try to redo the same kind of a thing, but in their own image, which would explain why when Rome ends, the 10 nations start. And since the 10 nations aren't here at the moment, we can assume Rome has not ended the empire. So they're in an intermission, like they were back here, like they were here, like they were here at different times. But the empire is still there. I think it's interesting how the United States led the effort twice to keep the Roman Empire dismantled. But I wanted to show you a couple things. Here's a picture that I found the other day. And this is interesting. This is on one of the old flags of the Byzantine Empire. So Germany, and this is the same thing, you see it all over, but Germany and Russia and the Byzantine Empire, they all have the symbol of a 2-headed eagle. Again, the eagle was Rome, but Rome split into east and west. So you have a 2-headed eagle. And what I thought was interesting is in the Ezra Apocalypse, it gives you the prophecy about the 3-headed eagle. And at the end, the feathers that represent certain Caesars and rulers and everything. But in the very end of the prophecy, the feathers are gone, the heads are gone. The only thing that's left is the body. And the Messiah, who's the Lion of Judah, comes to destroy that nation, that empire, and set up a kingdom that won't end. And so it's interesting seeing that. But in the process, it says that he comes, the only thing left is the body. And you're just thinking this body right here. But then there's this little comment, and the Ezra Apocalypse, it has like, here's the dream. It's 1, 2, 3. And then in the other chapter, the angel says, well, when you saw 1, 2, 3, it means this. So there's the prophecy, and then there's the explanation from the angel. The angel makes a comment about none of its heads, wings, or talons are there anymore. Like these are major pieces of it. So if the wings represented the old Caesars and the heads represented the 3 pieces of the Roman Empire, and those are big pieces, what do the talons represent? And what I thought was interesting, and I went back last night just to look this up, just to see, thinking of an eagle. I'm thinking of an American bald eagle, and that may not be, the eagle that's being talked about. But the whole idea, see, I've got 4 fingers and a thumb, so I can grab stuff. And the eagles tend to have 3 talons and then a back talon. And I was looking up to see, are there any eagles, large birds, predatory birds that have talons that have a different number, like maybe 2 and a thumb, or 5 or whatever. And they seem to all be 3 up front with a back talon. So something like this. So, and as you can see here on this one, me see if I can bump this up just a little bit better. There you go. As you can see in here, there's 3 front talons and a back, 3 front talons in the back. So why am I mentioning this? If these are the last century, or the last few centuries and how it sets up, and this is the beginning, and at the end, when Messiah comes to destroy the empire, all that's left is the body. If the body means body and talons, and if we have 3 and a thumb, basically, so 4 talons here and 4 talons here, that is a total of 8 talons. Now we have the 10 toes and the 10 horns. And Daniel tells us that the Antichrist comes along and tries to take it over, 7 of which submit to him and 3 go against him. So he destroys the 3 nations and comes in amongst them and rules the others and becomes officially the 8th out of the 7. And you see this in Revelation 2, because in Revelation, not chapter 2, also in Revelation, you see that the dragon has 10 horns and 10 crowns on this head. Later on in another chapter, you'll see that the head has 10 horns and only 7 crowns. So 3 have been removed. It's telling us this is before or after the middle of the tribulation period. So this is interesting to me. So again, if the wings represent the Caesars back at the time when we had the start of the split between the East and West, and the heads represent Germany, which is the Holy Roman Empire part, the Byzantine part, and then the Russian part, and the one fizzles out, and in the end we have the 2, and that's where we're at now. But the 2 come together and are destroyed in the Ezekiel 38 war. That would only leave the talons. And so if we go by Daniel, we're told there's 10 nations that come to power, but they can't seem to do anything because they're too democratic. Some are strong, some are weak. They just can't make anything happen. Then the Antichrist comes and says, here's how it's going to be. 3 of them rebel, and he destroys them, takes them over. And so now there's 8 total. So the empire can continue in ferocity and in strength with 8 talons, or 10 horns with 7 crowns, and an antichrist. So I just thought it was really interesting to kind of see all of that together. In light of this, Russia is moving. So we know from Ezekiel 38, Russia is moving, beginning to grow in power. It's a superpower already, but beginning to assert its dominance. And it was somewhat content to just be by itself until you have, at least in excuses anyway, in the West, you've got the gender fluidity and the pro-homosexuality and the destruction of the family unit. All of these would be major concerns of any Orthodox Christian group, like Russian Orthodox. And so maybe Putin's using it as an excuse, but at least he's saying, this is what I'm for. So if people in the West are trying to influence us to make us modern so that we're pro-homosexual, pro-gender fluidity, pro-this, pro-that, leave our part out. And the more we push, the more they push back. So it's interesting how all this kind of comes to a head. Plus the gas situation, natural gas. So again, it could be something coming soon, or maybe not super soon, but it's all played out in part of this stuff. But I wanted to show you that because I just thought that was really interesting. The 8 talons. We go from the 10 horns to the 8 talons. So this is an old Byzantine Empire flag. Let me show you something else. I thought this was interesting. This was taken from a document. Let me run it down just a little bit. Now the Russian emblem is the same thing. It's usually a 2-headed eagle with the wings. But what they'll do is they'll put a globe with a cross on it, meaning the world. And that's always been an Eastern Orthodox sign. It's Christianity taking over the world type thing. And then a sword over here. You'll still notice like a thumb and 3 talons, so 4 talons total over here. But anyway, so this is a variant of the Eastern Orthodox one, or of the Russian one. And so what happened is Ivan the Terrible becomes the first Tsar. Excuse me. And I think there's two or three, like a son, grandson, something like that. And then his dynasty is thrown. And some other dynasty takes over, and there's two or three of them, and they're overthrown. Well, the second group is overthrown by the Romanovs. The Romanovs have a continual dynasty from that time period. It's about 100 years into it, all the way down to 1917. Well, the very first Tsar, Caesar of Russia, was Michael I. He had the emblem changed just a little bit, and this is his emblem, which is different than the Russian emblem. And he had it changed to a three-headed eagle. Really interesting. But of course, in one hand is the Orthodox, and the other hand is the sword. So again, the idea that Russia, now that the empire fell to Muslim hands, Russia's the only thing left to guard Eastern Orthodoxy, so to speak, the only one large enough, powerful enough to do something like that. So this whole concept. But was Michael aware of the three-headed eagle prophecy? Did he understand it? Did he accept it but misunderstand it? Very interesting. But these kind of things, it's really interesting to see. So another thing I wanted to share you, this is a Nazi emblem way back when, during the time of Hitler, one of the flags or emblems. And you can see it's the same thing. It's a two-headed eagle with the wings and the four talons on each one. And of course, the circle is a swastika. So it's a Nazi symbol on top of it rather than an Eastern Orthodox or whatever. And then the star and everything. And then two hammers instead of peace and war, which is kind of interesting. But anyway, so it's a different version yet again. So, and then here is a, see if I can do this. Let me run it down just a smidgen. There we go. Anyway, this is a plaque of a traditional Russian emblem. So for the longest time, and still I believe this is the Russian emblem. So you've got the two heads, the two sides of the empire, the wings, and then of course the Eastern Orthodox scepter and globe that they have. Now, one thing that I thought was interesting, I was looking at this, the scepter and the globe have been symbols for Eastern Orthodoxy for a long time, so it's not a big deal. But I wanted to share one other thing with you. When I was studying some of the ancient Jewish texts, there is a thing called the Avodah Zarah, which is basically foreign worship. And it details and explains what is and is not acceptable when you're working with pagans. You know, like today we have what's called pan-Babylonian stuff. So somebody might come to my house and say, you have a Christmas tree, that's pagan. Well, even if it was, if part of it is still pagan or was pagan, is that enough to say I shouldn't have it, or should I ignore it, or how does that work? And the Avodah Zarah is the thing that explains all that. So for instance, if there's a statue of George Washington in a museum, it's just a statue. It doesn't need to be destroyed. It's not an idol. It's just a statue. Hopefully it looks like the way he looked. That's the point of the statue. However, if some people start bowing down and praying to George Washington, then it becomes an idol and it needs to be destroyed. That's kind of the line that they would give on that. So what if this? Well, if it goes this far, it's an idol. If it doesn't. So it's a really interesting work, the Avodah Zarah. So let me show you one piece to this. This is a section in the third section here. All images are prohibited, talking about idols, okay? Because each one is worshipped once a year according to this rabbi. But the sages say, so this rabbi said, all images, no statues at all. This kind of reminds me of this iconoclastic controversy between the Catholics and Orthodox. Flat ones only. So the rabbi saying, no images, no images of any kind, period. But that's this rabbi. The sages, the ancient rabbis, said only a statue that has, and doesn't have to be human, but some sort of statue, three-dimensional object that has in its hands a stick, a bird, or an orb are prohibited. And it goes on and talks about other stuff. And, if it's got the sun, moon, and stars or dragons, and because those were worshipped in occult circles and stuff like that. The basic idea, if you just go ahead and read this whole thing going on down, is, and let me do this so we can see it easier. There we go. Anyway, the basic idea is if it's decoration, it's not an idol. An idol is something that's used in a religious thing. So they talk about, for instance, if you go to a grocery store or a restaurant and say the owner's Hindu or some religion, or, ancient Roman, and he's got pictures all around his walls of Zeus and Hera and Hercules and whatever. Well, they're decoration because he never does a ritual with them. They're just decoration. So you can go in there and eat. That's what Paul calls the shambles in 1 Corinthians 10. That kind of a concept. If they ever use it as a ritual in some religion, then you're forbidden to go in there and eat. So that kind of a thing. So it's interesting in saying all this. Well, what constitutes an idol? Well, one used in a ritual, but some sages said something about it's has to have a stick, a bird, or an orb in it. I have no clue what we're talking about, other than somehow back then a stick or a scepter an orb had something to do with maybe taking over the world, or maybe magic, or something like that. Whatever it was way back when. We're talking thousands of years ago. So with that in case, it's interesting. Here's a statue or a symbol with a scepter, which is kind of like a stick, and an orb. Just never connected those two before. Now, we can say this is a totally different situation, and it probably is, but it's interesting. Scepter, globe. Stick, orb. It's kind of interesting. Lots of interesting things to see. Anyway, I just wanted to share those with you. So, again, the basic idea, the main idea I wanted to share with this is this whole concept of the talons. So if we have an accurate prophecy that was given in the Ezra Apocalypse, it's called Second Ezra in the King James Bible. And what happened, it's been outside the Bible for a long time. Really should not be part of the Old Testament. It's part of that center part. So where the scrolls are and that kind of time. But when the compromise was made between the Catholics and the Protestants, and they created the King James Bible, so you have the Old Testament and the New Testament with nothing added to it. And the reason why that's important is because that's the way that the Ezra Apocalypse says it should be. There should be 39 books in the Old Testament, and then whatever's in the New Testament canon, which is prophesied from the scrolls. So those are done, but you don't add, it's 39 and 27, that's it. So if you want to put other books in with your Bible or whatever, you'd put them in the center or the ends or wherever they would go chronologically. So the compromise was, we'll take stuff that the Catholics like and put in the center, and it would be an apocrypha. Well, since you're adding to the canon anyway, not the old canon or the new canon, but in between, if that's okay to do, we're going to add the Roman Catholic Apocrypha in the middle. The Anglican Church, not the Catholics, but the Anglican Church said, if that's okay, and that's what we're going to do, we're going to stick the Ezra Apocalypse in there too, because it's pretty important from an Anglican standpoint, an anti-Roman Catholic standpoint. And so that's why we have that. So if you get a facsimile copy or an old copy of a King James 1611, you'll have the Ezra Apocalypse in it, which will tell you that. And it's got this vision of the three-headed eagle. So it accurately predicts the number of Caesars up to the split of the empire, and then the heads, which we never completely understood. And again, when Messiah comes to set up the kingdom, all that's left is the body, which we assume include the talons from that little comment that the angel made. And since all talons of eagles, and most birds anyway, are 4 on each foot, the end part, the very, very end part of the Roman Empire, the reconstituted empire, is a 10-toed kingdom where 3 of them are destroyed by the Antichrist, leaving 7. He enters them, and his nation becomes the 8th. So we have this 8th kingdom, or 8-taloned kingdom. So again, there's a lot more study to go through. We'll be looking at this in Daniel and Revelation and the Dead Sea Scrolls from those type, because they have some extra prophecies too. And the more and more I look at it, the more I begin to think maybe they're not garbled at all. Just like when we first looked at Daniel chapter 2, that statue, we're scratching our head going, gold, silver, I have no idea what it means. But in time, you figure it out. Anyway, just wanted to kind of share that. That's a lot of information to those of you that have studied the Ezra Apocalypse with us before. And I think we've got some videos out on YouTube. Eventually, we'll want to redo them if we can figure out more stuff. But the new piece of information is the 8 talons. So pretty interesting. Okay, we'll go ahead and stop there for tonight. I'll look in the chat room and see if there's any questions. Looks like we got a few. Let's see here. I do want to mention one other thing. As you know, I've been working on 2 books. One is a Spanish translation of the Ancient Order of Melchizedek. That's not done yet, but it's very, very close. It might be out in a week or so. So we're doing this one just to see how it sells, if there's really an interest in Spanish versions. And if there is, we can go forward and do all the books in Spanish. But the other one, that's just a translation. So I haven't been doing a lot with it, just kind of waiting on proofs and stuff. But the other one is today we finally finished the new translation that we've been working on, which is the Damascus Covenant. Kind of want to share you here. So here's our BibleFacts.org and our bookstore. And these are the Dead Sea Scroll studies. And we've looked at these before. We've got the Book of Enoch, Ancient Order of Melchizedek. And again, the Spanish one's not there yet. Jubilees, Gad the Seer, Testaments of the Patriarchs, the Dead Sea Scroll Calendar. And this one, Skywatch TV put together, which is Testaments, Calendar, and Melchizedek, I believe, those 3 together in one source. And then here is our new one that we just got released. So this is the only available in English. We should have the paperback and the Kindle ready sometime this week. Eventually we'll have the audiobook for sure, and if we continue the Spanish stuff. So just wanted to let you know. If you click on that now here, I don't think there's anything. Let me refresh it. So nope, there's nothing there yet, but it should be in the next couple days. So another victory. So I'm really happy. This is the one that talks about all the theology and the history of the Essenes. So it should be really good. So, okay, let me go and look at the questions. Was listening to your Ancient Prophecies book again, was wondering, where is Israel in the 7 shepherds prophecy? Still pretty much in the middle. That's a prophecy out of Micah chapter 5 that talks about between the second return of Israel, which now that it's history we know was 1948, and the return of the Messiah, which is sometime in the future. There's supposed to be 8 wars between Israel and Syria, where they take Syrian land. And we've had one in 48, 67, 73, and 82. And to that point, it all deals with the Golan Heights. And so from that point forward, there's not much that's happened with the Golan Heights. However, Russia and other places are saying they don't recognize Israeli sovereignty, and it will go back to Syria one way or the other. And that, it's not necessarily happening now, but that's what they've been saying. So I can see it going back and forth a few more times. So Don't get disheartened though, because that kind of stuff happens and things can happen in a matter of weeks. So, next question. Is there any evidence of Jeremiah hiding Hebrew texts in the ancient Jordanian towns such as Heshbon? I don't know about evidence, but there is, let me think, where was that at? In, I want to say Second Maccabees. I think it's Second Maccabees. It talks about, pretty sure. Anyway, there's a text, I think it's Second Maccabees, that talks about Jeremiah putting the Ark of the Covenant and some other artifacts in a cave somewhere for safekeeping. And people have said maybe that's the caves under the Temple Mount, maybe it's in Qumran, maybe it's somewhere else. And so that's kind of debatable. And so we'll see what we, find. So, everybody's looking for like the gold lid, stuff like that. And most of us are more concerned. I'd like to see a picture of that, but we're more concerned with scrolls if there's more information. So there's that text that's mentioned it, but I don't know of anything else. There are things like in the fragments of the Nathan's Testament, he talks about prophecies about the coming Messiah, probably first coming prophecies. But anyway, that he wrote down and put in his hometown. And that would be Gibeon, the Gibeonites. So he was in Nethan, so it would be up there somewhere if it still exists. So there's several writings about other texts, other places. And so if you believe the Dead Sea Scrolls and you kind of follow directions to go try to find other texts with, certain titles and stuff, we'll see where that leads us. Psalm 120, verse 5, David dwelt in Meshach. When was David in Moscow? I think it was Turkey or Scythians or something. Well, let's see real quick. And Psalm 120. Okay, woe is me that I sojourn in Meshach and dwell in the tents of Kedar. Kedar was close by. I'm not sure where that's at. Let's see what we can find here. And yeah, people descended from him. So yeah, that's I don't know where that would be because no matter how you did that, that would be a long ways off. So it's the same from let's see here. Yeah, Meshach. Okay, his farm. Let's see here. Price. Okay, yeah, we're not sure exactly where that's at. There's a lot of things like that. Like Elijah went to Zarephath, and that is a city up in Lebanon. But the word in modern Hebrew means France. So we know that Elijah didn't go to France. He went to a city in Lebanon. So there's a lot of repeats on things like that. That's interesting, though. Is there any evidence of Jeremiah hiding Hebrew text in any Edomite city, such as Hesh? Yeah, that's kind of a repeat of the other one. I don't know that there's any evidence, but we do have some of the written text, like talking about him putting things in caves. So was Jesus born in 4 BC? Well, according to the scrolls, he would have been born in 2 BC, dying in 32 AD when he was 33 and a half. And let's see here. I heard that some in the early church believed that Nero would be revived and was the Antichrist. Is that possible? If righteous immortals like Elijah and Enoch exist, could there be wicked immortals also? I suppose it's possible. There were some church fathers that speculated Nero might be the Antichrist. Others said, he couldn't be because it'd have to be a long time off. So there was that kind of stuff. There was actually 2 or 3 that speculated that he might be the Antichrist. So I'm not sure, how that would go. That would be interesting, though. There's been a lot of speculation that it says kind of the same thing with Nimrod, that he became a mighty hunter, became a Nephilim, which might just be saying great hunter, great man. Um, just like today, if someone, some general takes over a country, he could be considered a god, or even though he's not. So it could be something like that, or and people talk about it maybe actually happening. So one of those things that's kind of interesting. Have you heard that the Antichrist could be the spirit of Nero returned? Watched a documentary on that, wondering what your thoughts were. Most of the church fathers seem to indicate that the Antichrist would be a person from today, whenever it happens, possessed by a demon. So it wouldn't be Nero himself, but it would be a Nephilim spirit, a demonic spirit. Now, if Nero was possessed of a demon, which some of the stuff that he did kind of makes sense, it could possibly be. Gomer is France, correct? Now, Gomer would be Germany. Or it could actually spread out to the whole area. It kind of depends. We'd have to do a really good understanding. But if for our time period, Spain, France, and Germany were the three countries where the empire was headquartered for a while, the most of which was in France. And the two times that the empire was people were trying to reconstitute it, it was always Germany. And one of the sons of Gomer is Ashkenaz, and we have the Ashkenazic Jews or the German Jews. So that's how we kind of put that up there in that category. Nimrod act as an antichrist. Anyone else hear this stuff before? Yeah, actually, he did. He had a one world religion. He had a false prophet. It was a guy named Anuki. He did many things like that. Abraham was supposed to destroy the empire, start the age of Torah, and he did eventually. His family did, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, but it took, like close to 200 years for the whole thing to form and eventually fall apart. So there's a lot of interesting history on Nimrod and the things that he did and how it worked. I thought the globe was an incense burner thing. Oh, I imagine it is. You could make an incense burner out of lots of stuff like that, especially if it's in a church that's does the incense or something. Could the Treaty of Rome and intervening associations leading up to the EU be considered part of the reconstitution of the Roman Empire? It's possible. Again, basically, we have a European version, which historically was France and Spain and Germany, or maybe it was called Prussia back then, but it's those territories. And then we have an eastern side, which is the Byzantine, which, according to the one text, would have morphed into Russia. So something like that. That's interesting too, because the whole concept that let me see if we go back here, see if I can find the original text here. I'll get there eventually. Okay, there we go. So this whole concept of Daniel 2, let me just hide that for a second, of the empire being split into two, and then you've got 5 toes of each side of the empire. It seems like these 5 toes, or these five of the 10, are in Europe somewhere. And these 5 would be Middle East and or Russian area somewhere. So just kind of an interesting thought. So the treaty, yeah, it actually might have something to do with that. Instead of the church, the people, could the restrainer possibly be the Holy Spirit who indwells the believers? So when the Holy Spirit is removed, the Antichrist can come into power. Yeah, basically, that's what it's kind of two sides of the same coin. A lot of us say that it's not so much the church, but the Holy Spirit filled believers that are holding back the Antichrist because we refuse to do stuff like that. Once we're all removed, then it would be possible. So we know the Holy Spirit is omnipresent, so he's everywhere. We know he gives the 144,000 abilities, so spiritual gifts. So the Holy Spirit is still doing things in a sense, maybe in a different form or whatever. But his influence is removed greatly because of all of the people being removed until we have the great multitude that forms out of that. So yeah, definitely. Okay, we'll go ahead and stop there for tonight. And again, mainly tonight's whole concept was I wanted you to think of the 8 talons and the 10 toes and the 10 horns and how they relate together. I just thought it was really interesting. So if we have an accurate representation of the beginning and the end, the middle part of that prophecy ought to be very accurate too, if we can figure out what it means. So again, we're trying to pull all of these back together so we can look at the church father comments and the scrolls and the prophecies and history and try to paint a complete picture on prophecy. And that's what we're going to be working on in the future. So we'll go ahead and say good night, and we will see you next Monday. God bless.